Love is often hailed as an unbreakable bond, a force powerful enough to conquer all obstacles. Yet, what happens when that love is built on a fragile foundation of secrets and lies? In this story, a wedding meant to symbolize the beginning of a beautiful new life together unravels into a nightmare of betrayal and bloodshed. Set in a serene, upscale neighborhood, this tragic tale unfolds behind the walls of what should have been a joyous celebration, a perfect union masking the dark, festering truths waiting to be exposed. This is the story of Derek, Leah, and Taryn, three individuals whose lives are on the verge of being forever altered by the choices they've made and the truths they've buried. At its heart lies Leah, the radiant bride, Derek, her seemingly devoted groom, and Taryn, his loyal best friend. Together, their lives form a web of fate and friendship, but beneath the surface of their close-knit bond lies a hidden truth, a truth that Derek and Taryn share, one far more intimate and dangerous than anyone suspects. As Derek stands at the altar, his heart is caught in a tempest. On one hand, he's about to pledge his life to Leah, the woman who represents stability and love. On the other, he's shackled by the weight of a clandestine life with Taryn, a secret so profound that its revelation threatens to leave nothing but destruction in its wake. Every story has a beginning, a moment when bonds are forged, secrets are first whispered, and lives intertwine. For Derek and Taryn, it all started with a friendship, one forged through years of shared experiences, laughter, and unspoken understanding. They were more than companions, they were confidants, anchors in a world that often felt too vast and unyielding. From the outside, their relationship seemed like that of any close friends, steadfast, supportive, and unwavering. But beneath that facade lay an undercurrent of something unspoken, something neither dared to fully acknowledge, let alone reveal. As the years passed, their bond grew only deeper, an unbreakable connection that transcended words. They were inseparable, friends who could finish each other's sentences and understand each other's thoughts with a single glance. When Leah entered their lives, she was warmly welcomed into their circle. She saw two men who cared deeply for one another, interpreting their closeness as a testament to Derek's capacity for love and loyalty. What she didn't see, what she couldn't see, were the fleeting moments between Derek and Taryn, a look that lingered a second too long, a touch charged with meaning, a word spoken with a weight she could never grasp. As the wedding day loomed closer, Derek found himself grappling with an anxiety he couldn't escape. He loved Leah, of that he was certain, but there was something else, something that had long lingered in the shadows of his life. It had waited, patient yet unrelenting, to be confronted. Taryn noticed too. He saw how Derek's smile had grown strained, how his laughter now rang hollow and forced. Leah, lost in her bridal bliss, remained oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. To fully understand the depth of this tale, we must turn back the clock, back to a time before the engagement, before the dress fittings and the floral arrangements, back to the moment when everything began to shift. It was an evening like any other, or so it seemed. Derek and Taryn were alone as they often were, sharing the easy companionship of two people who knew each other's souls. But this night was different. The air between them was charged, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on them both. That tension, always present but never acknowledged, felt unbearable. And then, in a moment of quiet inevitability, the line they had never dared to cross dissolved. A glance lingered too long. A hand brushed a shoulder with an intent impossible to ignore. The boundary shattered, and with it, the delicate balance of their lives. What followed was a choice, a single, undeniable step into a reality that would change everything. This story is not just about love or betrayal, it's about the cost of hidden truths and the fragile ties that bind us, even as they threaten to break us apart. The fragile balance that had once kept their relationship safe and uncomplicated was irreparably shattered. What followed was a night of confusion, unbridled passion, and a fear so profound it threatened to consume them both. They were no longer just friends, they had become something undefined, something intoxicating yet dangerous, and something they instinctively knew could never be revealed. In the days and weeks that followed, they buried their secret deep, concealing it from the world and, most importantly, from Leah. Yet, with every stolen glance, every furtive meeting, the weight of their deception grew heavier. Derek was trapped between two worlds, the life he had always known and was expected to live, and the life he had tasted, one filled with a love as terrifying as it was all-consuming. Taryn felt the same unbearable dread, haunted not only by what they had done but also by the looming fear of what would happen if the truth ever came to light. As the wedding day crept closer, the tension between them became impossible to ignore. They tried to pretend, to cling to the illusion of their old friendship, but both knew the truth. Nothing was the same. Derek's behavior grew erratic. His mood swung wildly, from moments of joy to episodes of despair, from bursts of excitement to waves of unshakable fear. He threw himself into the wedding preparations with a manic fervor that surprised everyone. But those closest to him could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. Taryn, in contrast, maintained a composed exterior, projecting an image of calm that belied the storm of emotions raging inside him. Love, guilt, jealousy, and an overwhelming sense of impending loss churned within, threatening to unravel him. Leah, blissfully unaware of the turmoil beneath her fiancé's calm demeanor, focused on the details of their impending nuptials, the dress, the flowers, the guest list. She was radiant with excitement, eagerly anticipating the life she was about to start with the man she loved. She didn't notice the way Derek's gaze would drift into the distance when he thought no one was watching. She didn't see how his hands trembled slightly when he spoke of their future. And she couldn't comprehend the way he sometimes pulled away from her touch, as though recoiling from a phantom she could never see. Even so, there were moments between Derek and Taryn, brief, fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet charged with an intensity that spoke volumes. A glance held just a heartbeat too long. A hand resting on a shoulder, lingering as if unwilling to let go. A whispered exchange in a crowded room that seemed to hold the weight of the world. Those who noticed these moments couldn't quite place their unease, but the tension was undeniable. Taryn, too, was struggling. He loved Derek deeply but was consumed by fear, fear of what their actions had set in motion, and fear of what was inevitable. The wedding would change everything. He knew that once Derek spoke his vows, their relationship, whatever it had become, would have to end. As the wedding day loomed, the pressure intensified. Derek often woke in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding as his mind raced with thoughts of the choices he faced and the losses he was about to endure. Taryn, ever present in his life, now felt impossibly distant. Fear, guilt, and the knowledge of their impending separation created a chasm between them. Each passing day brought more tension, the weight of their unspoken truths becoming unbearable. The wedding day approached like a storm cloud on the horizon, dark, ominous, and threatening to destroy everything in its path. Derek, trapped in a web of his own making, knew that no matter what he chose, someone would be hurt. He just didn't know how much, or how soon. Finally, the day arrived. The air was heavy with anticipation, but Derek felt none of the joy expected of a groom. As he stood at the altar, his heart thundered in his chest, not with excitement, but with a gnawing anxiety that threatened to consume him. Each step Leah took down the aisle felt like a nail sealing the coffin of the life he thought he might have had. Taryn stood nearby as Derek's best man, a role he had played for years in more ways than one. But today, the title felt unbearably heavy. Derek's gaze flicked to him, and Taryn forced a smile, though his eyes betrayed the depth of his pain. He stood silently watching the man he loved promise himself to someone else, the weight of that moment pressing down on him like a tidal wave. The ceremony proceeded as expected. Vows were spoken, rings exchanged, and the couple was pronounced husband and wife. But for Derek, every word felt hollow, every gesture a painful reminder of the truth he was hiding and the love he could never openly claim. At the reception, the mood was jubilant. Guests celebrated with laughter and cheer, but Derek was far from jubilant. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, torn between the life he had just committed to and the intense, consuming connection with Taryn that he couldn't ignore. Leah, radiant with happiness, began to sense something was amiss. Derek's smiles were forced, his laughter hollow. Taryn, too, struggled to maintain his composure. He navigated the room with a veneer of calm, but inside, he was a maelstrom of love, guilt, and loss. Each stolen glance between them was like a dagger, a silent acknowledgement of what they had and what they were losing. And so, the night wore on, a celebration for everyone else, but a quiet tragedy for the three at its center, each one caught in a storm of their own making, bound by love, betrayal, and secrets that could never stay hidden. Every congratulatory toast and every smile Derek forced felt like a dagger twisting deeper into his heart. Throughout the night, he and Taryn exchanged brief, tense glances, their shared secret hanging over them like a dark and ominous cloud. For everyone else, the day was a celebration of love and new beginnings, but for Derek and Taryn, it was a bittersweet reminder of the truth they were desperately trying to bury. As the reception began to wind down, Derek's unease became harder to conceal. Leah noticed the distant look in his eyes, how his mind seemed far away. She tried to dismiss it as exhaustion from the long day, but something about his demeanor gnawed at her, a subtle yet persistent whisper of doubt. Derek, who had always been attentive and loving, seemed almost detached tonight. When she attempted to engage him, his responses were clipped, his gaze darting around the room as though searching for someone, or something. The truth was that Derek couldn't stop thinking about Taryn. The affair, an unexpected and recent development, had thrown his life into chaos. The connection between them, ignited in the days leading up to the wedding, now burned fiercely, refusing to be extinguished. On what should have been the happiest day of his life, Derek was drowning in guilt and confusion. He tried to focus on Leah, to be the husband she deserved, but his thoughts kept circling back to Taryn. The weight of his double life was crushing him. As the night wore on, Derek's anxiety became palpable. He knew he needed to talk to Taryn, to confront the turmoil that was consuming him, but this wasn't the place, not with Leah watching so closely. Meanwhile, Taryn was battling his own internal storm. Their affair had been brief but incendiary, a whirlwind of emotions that neither had anticipated. Watching Derek with Leah was a deeper agony than he'd prepared for. Every smile, every touch shared between the newlyweds felt like a knife slicing through him, a reminder of what he could never truly have. Taryn could see the torment in Derek's eyes, the way he avoided Leah's gaze, the way his attention kept gravitating toward him across the room. They had spent weeks cloaking their relationship in secrecy, but tonight, the strain was evident. The tension between them was so thick it was almost tangible, though only perceptible to those who knew where to look. As the evening drew to a close, Derek and Leah retired to their bridal suite. Leah, still radiant with joy, was eager to share a romantic, intimate night with her new husband. But Derek couldn't bring himself to engage. The thought of being close to Leah felt wrong, like a betrayal, not only of her but of Taryn as well. He mumbled excuses about exhaustion and the stress of the day, hoping she wouldn't probe further. Though disappointed, Leah tried to be understanding. She kissed him goodnight, whispering reassurances, but a seed of unease had already taken root in her mind. As she drifted into a restless sleep, Derek lay beside her, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts were a cacophony of guilt, fear, and longing. He knew he was hurting Leah, that she deserved more than what he could offer, but he couldn't summon the strength to pretend any longer. The love he felt for Taryn, the guilt of their affair, and the fear of everything unraveling were too overwhelming. Sleep was impossible. After hours of tossing and turning, Derek made a decision: he needed to talk to Taryn. He needed clarity, a moment of honesty in the chaos they had created, in the hope of finding some semblance of peace. Quietly, he slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Leah. The hotel halls were dark and eerily silent, the stillness amplifying the turmoil in his heart. Each step toward Taryn's room felt heavier, as if his body itself was trying to resist the confrontation he knew was coming. His heart pounded, not with anticipation, but with fear. When he finally knocked on Taryn's door, the pause that followed felt endless. When the door opened, Taryn stood there, his eyes a mirror of Derek's turmoil. Vulnerable and raw, dressed only in his underwear, Taryn's presence was both comforting and unnerving. No words were needed, they both understood why Derek had come. Derek stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a weighty finality. They sat down, the air between them thick with unspoken emotions. Derek struggled to find the words, to voice the maelstrom inside him. He wanted to talk about what had happened, to figure out a way forward that wouldn't destroy everything, but his throat felt tight, his mind paralyzed. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Finally, Derek broke it, his voice trembling as he confessed his love for Taryn. He admitted that he couldn't let go, that he didn't know how to move forward with Leah while his heart still belonged to someone else. Desperation tinged his words as he asked the question that had haunted him for weeks, what do we do now? Before they could find an answer, the emotions they had been suppressing erupted. The need to feel something, anything, to escape the pain and confusion became overwhelming. In a moment of weakness, they surrendered to the desire that had been simmering between them for so long. The affair, born of passion and turmoil, unfolded in the quiet darkness of Taryn's room. Both men were acutely aware of the consequences but found themselves powerless to stop. It was a brief, desperate attempt to hold on to something they knew was slipping away. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The gravity of what they had done hit them like a tidal wave. Derek sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, consumed by thoughts of Leah and the life he had just vowed to share with her. The future he had envisioned now felt impossibly fragile, riddled with uncertainty. Taryn, too, was lost in thought. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The night, which had begun with so much promise, had spiraled into a nightmare of their own making. Meanwhile, Leah stirred in her sleep, reaching out for Derek. The empty space beside her was cold, a silent harbinger of the truths about to unravel her world. When her hand brushed the cold, empty side of the bed, Leah jolted awake, her heart pounding. Panic surged through her as she realized Derek wasn't there. She called his name, her voice trembling and raw, but the only response was the oppressive silence of the room. Her chest tightened as dread crept in. Slipping out of bed, she pulled on her robe and stepped into the dimly lit hotel hallway, her soft footsteps echoing ominously in the quiet. The eerie stillness only magnified her growing sense of unease. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Instinct guided her to Taryn's room. Standing before the door, she hesitated, her stomach twisting into knots as she raised a shaking hand to knock. The sound of her knuckles against the wood echoed in the silence. Nothing. She knocked again, harder this time, her anxiety sharpening with each unanswered moment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Taryn stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of shock and guilt. His disheveled appearance, dressed only in his underwear, sent an icy wave of realization crashing over Leah. Her breath caught in her throat, and though Derek wasn't immediately visible, she didn't need to see him. The truth, which had lingered like a shadow on the edges of her awareness, was now glaringly obvious. The betrayal struck her like a physical blow. The man she had just married, the man she thought she knew, had deceived her in the most devastating way. Leah froze, her mind struggling to process the scene before her. Then her gaze shifted, and she saw Derek, seated on the edge of the bed, his head bowed, his face etched with shame and despair. The weight of it all came crashing down on her, leaving no room for doubt. Betrayal. Humiliation. Rage. The emotions surged through Leah like a tidal wave, too powerful to contain. Her voice trembled as she demanded answers, her words sharp and venomous. Derek, cornered and desperate, stumbled over his explanations, the words faltering on his lips. Taryn, equally trapped, could only watch in helpless silence as the situation unraveled. Leah's anger boiled over, her hands shaking with fury as she pointed an accusing finger at Derek. Her voice rose with every word, growing louder, more frantic, her heartbreak morphing into something darker, something dangerous. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have ever imagined, and the pain fueled an uncontrollable rage. Overwhelmed by the storm of her emotions, Leah lunged at Derek, her fury driving her actions. The room erupted into chaos. Derek, shocked and pleading, tried to hold her back, his voice imploring her to calm down, but his words were drowned out by her cries of anguish. The shattering of her trust had broken something within her, something that could never be repaired. Taryn, caught between his love for Derek and his guilt over the affair, stood frozen in horror as the confrontation spiraled further out of control. The tension that had been building all night snapped, unleashing the darkness they had all tried to suppress. In a moment of blind, unrelenting rage, Leah grabbed the nearest object, a heavy decorative lamp. Without hesitation, she swung it with all her strength. The sound of the impact was sickening. Derek collapsed to the floor, blood pooling quickly beneath him. For a brief, agonizing moment, time seemed to stand still. Taryn rushed to Derek's side, his hands trembling as he tried to staunch the bleeding, but it was futile. The damage was done. Derek's lifeless eyes stared back at him, unblinking, and the horrifying reality sank in. Leah stood frozen, the lamp slipping from her hands and clattering to the floor. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as the enormity of her actions began to dawn on her. But the rage hadn't yet fully subsided. Overcome by grief and madness, her fury turned to Taryn. In her mind, he was to blame for everything, for the lies, the betrayal, the destruction of the life she had envisioned. Before Taryn could react, Leah lashed out again, her desperation and sorrow fueling her actions. She struck him with wild, unrelenting force, her sobs mingling with his cries of pain. The second blow sent Taryn crumpling to the ground beside Derek, their blood pooling together on the cold, unyielding floor. And then, silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that echoed the finality of what had just occurred. Leah stood amidst the wreckage, her chest heaving as her mind struggled to comprehend the nightmare she had unleashed. The lamp lay at her feet, its weight inconsequential compared to the guilt pressing down on her. She dropped to her knees beside Derek, her trembling hands reaching for him, shaking him as though she could will him back to life. Tears streamed down her face, her sobs growing louder and more desperate as she realized there was no undoing what she had done. The man she had loved, the man she had vowed to spend her life with, was gone. Taken by her own hand in a moment of uncontrollable rage. She turned to Taryn, his lifeless body crumpled beside Derek, his face frozen in an expression of shock and fear. Both of them gone. Leah's cries filled the room, raw and broken, as the reality of her actions hit her like a physical blow. There was no escape from the truth, no way to turn back time. The weight of her choices bore down on her with merciless clarity, and she sat in the middle of the carnage, consumed by the devastating consequences of a single night that had destroyed everything. Leah's thoughts tumbled over one another, frantic and chaotic, as she searched desperately for an escape, for some way to undo the horror she had unleashed. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, scanning for anything, that could erase the reality before her. But there was nothing. No reprieve, no salvation. The blood on her hands, smeared across the floor and splattered on the walls, was stark, undeniable, and devastatingly final. In her despair, Leah sank to her knees and began scrubbing at the blood, her trembling hands moving with a manic urgency. Her ragged sobs echoed off the walls, filling the room with a sound that was both pitiful and haunting. But it was futile. The crimson stains wouldn't fade, wouldn't disappear. With every frantic motion, the futility of her efforts became painfully clear, and the grotesque scene around her seemed to mock her desperation. What had been a room of celebration, alive with the promise of love and new beginnings, was now a scene of unimaginable horror. The remnants of joy and hope were replaced with shattered glass, smeared blood, and a silence so heavy it seemed to press down on her chest. The love that had once bound her, Derek, and Taryn together was now twisted and unrecognizable, reduced to this grim tableau of violence and betrayal. Exhausted and broken, Leah collapsed onto the floor beside Derek and Taryn, her body convulsing with uncontrollable sobs. The weight of what she had done, of what she had lost, descended on her like a suffocating shroud. She was alone now, utterly and completely alone, with only the echoes of her actions to keep her company. The magnitude of her choices crushed her, leaving her with one lingering, inescapable question: what now? As the first pale rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, illuminating the wreckage, Leah knew there would be no escape from the consequences of this night. The reality was unavoidable. Whether to flee or to surrender, she hadn't yet decided, but one thing was certain: her life, once filled with so much promise and love, had been irrevocably shattered. What had started as a celebration of love, unity, and the beginning of a new chapter had devolved into a night of betrayal, violence, and irreversible loss. The wedding, a symbol of hope and eternal commitment, now lay in ruins. The laughter and vows that had once filled the room were overshadowed by the dark, destructive secrets that had torn them apart. The wedding venue, once adorned with flowers and light, was now a desolate crime scene, heavy with the silence of lives cut short and a future obliterated. Leah, the bride who had once dreamed of a life filled with love and happiness, now sat alone, her tear-streaked face etched with regret, grief, and a profound sense of emptiness. This was a night where love had curdled into hatred, trust had crumbled into betrayal, and life had been extinguished by the very hands that once promised to nurture and protect. As the events of this tragic night replay in our minds, they force us to grapple with its deeper meaning. Derek, Taryn, and Leah were not merely victims of their own choices but of the crushing weight of societal expectations, suppressed desires, and the secrets they had felt compelled to keep. Those secrets, buried under layers of shame and fear, had festered into the very forces of their undoing. What does this story reveal about the human condition? About the fragile ways we navigate love, loyalty, and identity in a world that often demands we suppress our truest selves to fit predetermined roles? The wedding rings, once symbols of unity and devotion, now lie discarded, broken representations of a union that was destined to fail. And there, amidst the wreckage, stands Leah, isolated in her grief and torment, bearing the unbearable consequences of actions driven by heartbreak, rage, and despair. This story leaves us confronting the devastating effects of betrayal, the weight of hidden truths, and the ultimate cost of living a life built on lies. It challenges us to consider how love, when twisted by secrecy and fear, can destroy as much as it was meant to heal. It asks us to reckon with the fragile threads of trust and loyalty that bind us, and how easily they can unravel, leaving only devastation in their wake. Ultimately, we are left to confront the grave consequences that stem from betrayal and the hidden lives we choose to lead. The harrowing events of this night serve as a chilling reminder of how swiftly love can curdle into hatred and how fragile the bonds of trust truly are when burdened by secrets too agonizing to keep. One haunting question lingers: in a world where truth is so often veiled beneath layers of deception, what price do we pay for living a life that denies our authentic selves? And when those carefully buried secrets finally surface, who bears the heaviest burden? This is a tale of love undone, trust shattered, and lives irreparably altered. It's a story that echoes far beyond its final moments, compelling us to examine the choices we make, the truths we bury, and the identities we claim. It urges us to consider the profound cost of deceit and the toll it takes, not just on ourselves but on everyone we touch. Let this be a reminder of the power of truth, the fragility of love, and the devastating fallout of betrayal, a story that refuses to fade even after the last word is spoken. If you found yourself moved by this tale, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to stay connected for more stories that provoke thought and spark conversation.